What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Sorting Myself Out. My name is Ryan Holsapple, and today we're going to talk about Sam Harris' recent comments on Jordan Peterson in a podcast with Paul Bloom, and then we're going to do a little throwback to the Harris-Peterson debates that happened, a couple years ago with Pangburn Philosophy. So, I just to set this all up, I'm a big fan of both Harris and Peterson. I think they're both good critical thinkers. I like listening to them speak. And I just treat them as different nuanced approaches with which to develop my own thinking. This isn't a controversial video where I'm pinning them against each other. This is simply an analysis of where their different ideas take us as people who are trying to develop intellectually and philosophically. So let's go ahead and take a look at Harris's recent comments on the podcast with Paul Bloom. And I'm going to share my screen, and is it Paul Bloom? Yes, it's Paul Bloom. I'm going to share my screen, and then we can go ahead and get into this.
And thinking about the analogy, I was listening to a podcast by Jordan Peterson, which I don't do, but I just wanted to listen to what he sounds like, what his book talk is. And there's something about it where you don't want to shut it off. You have no idea where it's going. And Peterson does something which Trump doesn't, which he displays genuine curiosity and interest and energy, a range of emotions you don't normally hear in this kind of talk. And there's something about it.
He's a very good speaker, but there's a kind of free associative, meandering,
Yes.
somewhat confabulatory thing going on in that.
So right there, they're kind of focusing on his rhetoric and his ability to pull people in with his speaking prowess. And then Sam uses the word confabulatory, which kind of is saying, he's kind of twisting the facts to fit his narrative. What Sam is saying is he thinks Peterson basically takes science and different historical issues and facts, and he takes them to fit his mythopoetic style of thinking. And to Sam, that's not rigorously honest, and that leads to issues such as religious mindsets, which he thinks are destructive. Let's continue listening here.
There's not a rigorously honest reality testing. And again, I like Jordan a lot, so it's, this is something I've said to his face and on stage. And so it's, this is not me saying anything behind his back that I haven't actually said to him, both in private and in public. And it's just, on some level, it's a different, he has an account for why this is a feature, not a bug. He thinks that, my slavish attachment to reality testing and logic is something that is a symptom of my own, rigidity and lack of awareness of certain truths that can be, bivalenced or, however, I'm just making up words.
So right there, Sam's referring to the ability to hold contradiction, to hold a paradox, to things that seem to be unfeasible, like they can't coexist with one another, yet they somehow manage to through this mythopoetic way of seeing, which Peterson is an advocate of, because Peterson essentially believes that we have emerged in our rational thinking from the deep substructures that have a mythopoetic basis. He believes that we have come out of this thousands of years of seeing the world in a religious way, and that has ultimately led to the Enlightenment and to the rationality that stands at the top of that pyramid, the eye at the top of that pyramid. But he fundamentally thinks Sam Harris kind of rejects how we got to where we are today. He makes a leap that he doesn't see how that leap gets made. It just kind of happens de novo, out of nowhere. And so that would be kind of Peterson's critique. And Peterson continued in the debates to say, well, you still haven't shown me how we get to this rational ethic that you're talking about, where we can derive our values out of facts, And I'm just looking at the comments here. Someone said, Sam already sounds kind of condescending. Yeah, I don't think he's trying to say that in a condescending way. because he did say it to Jordan's face. I think he's just being honest about what he thinks. I also thought it sounded I thought it seemed like it was a little bit insulting to say, "Oh, Peterson, he's a great speaker, but he doesn't really have any reality behind him." And they were talking about Donald Trump too, and kind of making a comparison. So I thought it was a bit of a stretch, actually. So I could totally see how it would come off as an insult. However, I do just want to be fair to Sam. I'm not sure if that's what he meant by it. I don't know if that was his intention, because he does also say that he likes Jordan, and it seems that they have somewhat of a friendship, even if it's tenuous. In any case, yeah, I do think it's definitely a caricature to bring his name up, within the same paragraph as Trump in a comparison of any sort, because obviously Peterson is a much different person. All right, we're going to keep going here.
Words that and putting them in his mouth, but he's more comfortable with paradox and a mythopoetic take on reality than I am, certainly. But none of that is, it would be amazing to...
Okay, and that's basically where they end, and then they go back to talking about Trump again. So he says he's more comfortable with paradox and a mythopoetic way of thinking. Well, I'm also partial to including the mythopoetic styles of consciousness in our assessment of reality, and in our psychological studies and our philosophical analysis. There is something about a poetic style of consciousness where these symbolic religions and myths emerge from. There's something about that gets us somewhere that a pure rationality doesn't. And I think fundamentally Peterson continued to make it clear that he believes we come in a priori with the predisposition to develop this rational worldview that now exists today because of this long history, and I've mentioned it earlier, of this long history we have with developing this style of consciousness. And I think that's part of what Nietzsche was ultimately saying, is the irony that Christianity, let's just take the Judeo-Christian worldview, is what led to its own demise. And what I think he was trying to say, and I'm no expert on Nietzsche per se, but I think what I get out of that is that all the evolutionary thinking and images that were kind of in that Judeo-Christian melting pot led us to the point where then we could turn back in on ourselves and discard the previous religious worldview and maintain something like a pure rationality, quote unquote. And so I think what Nietzsche was trying to get at, in part, was the irony of a worldview that actually starts eating itself because it has developed beyond itself, and the ground underneath of it falls out, and so you have nowhere to stand, which is kind of the nihilistic problem that Nietzsche ran into with God is Dead. I think Peterson is really understanding that problem. I think he really gets at that and says, look, we're in a very remarkable transition in society right now where we need to be careful about what we discard and what we take on as a new belief or set of beliefs for reality, because we're hanging by a thread here, and this is totally unknown territory. So next we're going to dive into some comments from I think it was the third debate where Douglas Murray was moderating. And I'm just looking at some of your comments here and seeing if there's anything I need to read. These are pretty fun. Thank you all for being here. I'm really glad you're here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and show you the next scene that I want to analyze with you all. And it's going to be the third debate, Dublin, I believe.
Having said to you what I think your concern is with Jordan, It strikes me that Jordan's concern, and I share this, just as I share some of your concern that we expressed at the outset. Jordan's fundamental concern, it seems to me, is one I fundamentally share, which is rationalism isn't enough, and it's, or let me put it another way.
Okay, but then,
let me
then
put it,
two of you, can you both show me?
So there, just need to pause every so often here. Rationalism isn't enough, again, alluding to the importance of a mythopoetic style of consciousness.
Where it's obviously insufficient. Like
Music.
But there's nothing. But again, so to say that it's not, to say that there's.
And here's where Sam's going to go with this, which I think is just absolutely fascinating, and where Sam continues to toe the line, is, okay, so Peterson says music. Okay, well, Sam pulls this move where he's like, the fact that music is somehow good for the human soul, he wouldn't even use the word soul because he's a rationalist, but that music is somehow this force of harmony that composes itself, and it doesn't make rational sense how we resonate with it and how we feel when we listen to it and how it adds meaning and value. Right, you're not deriving value out of facts about music. You just simply enjoy the song. It's not a rational thing. Well, Sam pulls this move where it's like, basically, no. Just because there's things we don't know about music, right? Like, that's just more facts that we don't understand. And so he tries to make facts kind of the mother of all things, where it's not that it's irrational. It's just that there are more facts about reality that we don't get. And that's a very interesting perspective. I'm curious to know in the comments what you all think about that way of thinking.
There's more to life than being rational is not to say, and perhaps never to say, you need to run against rationality. You need to be irrational in order to get something good.
Let me express it a different way.
Yeah.
We haven't tried the purely rational approach yet, or we haven't tried it for very long.
Well, many of us have been trying for a couple of centuries at least.
Which is a blip.
Yeah.
I mean, the tiniest dot at the end.
Someone in the comments just asked, what recent comment are we talking about? If you go back to the earlier in this video, then you'll see we went over Sam Harris's podcast with Paul Bloom.
Of human evolution. So I think that a concern which Jordan has, and certainly a concern I have, is if we try this, we can think of all sorts of ways in which it can go wrong. If you take away all that supporting structure, you can think of any number of ways in which it can go wrong. And that I suppose that's at the root of the concern about where you might be taking us.
Again, just notice how Douglas Murray, who, by the way, I think is also a brilliant thinker. If you haven't had a chance to check out some of his interviews, it's well worth it. Again, pointing back to, we are in new territory. All of history that we know of, we have depended on a mythopoetic way of thinking and seeing the world, whether it be a devout, Christian or any other religion. And now that is beginning to fall by the wayside a little bit, there's a major concern. And the importance, I think, that Peterson continues to maintain is that, yes, the worldviews are changing, the world is changing around us, but still within the human psyche. Remember, he's a psychologist, so he is looking at what's happening within the human structure, the way that we perceive, the way that we come into the world, the differences in personality traits, the best way to navigate the world. We have to honor this deeper force within us that has the tendency to see the world in a symbolic way, not in terms of pure rationality, but in terms of metaphor, and in terms of what Brett Weinstein calls useful fictions. And while Harris grants that these useful fictions are important and that there are circumstances, they use the example of always act as if a gun is loaded, he still is refusing to come over to Peterson's side, where there is something really precious being lost in Peterson's estimation.
Or to put it another way, if we enter the world that you would suggest not everyone may necessarily come out as Sam Harris.
Well, give me one way where you think it can go wrong. And again, we can't forget your caveat, which you started with.
What if you're not very smart?
Okay, and then I'm going to stop it here. But then they get into, Peterson gets into a little bit of a testy situation. Well, again, credit to the man. He always says what he thinks, and he doesn't back down from the challenge as long as he's really thought it through. But basically, he's saying, what if people aren't as smart as, say, a Sam Harris? Okay, so maybe a Sam Harris or a Nietzsche can be the Uberman or the Ubermensch, the Superman who can derive their own values out of the world that they perceive with the force of their incredible cognitive abilities. But what about the everyday man? Because after all, not everybody is a Sam Harris. Not everybody, and we know from the research on genetics that, or intelligence and genetics, we know that a lot of intelligence is, in fact, you're born with it. It's not something that you can credit to yourself. It's something that it's relatively stable throughout a lifetime. Yes, you can improve by education. Yes, you can learn and grow. But for the most part, you have a starting kit, and you have to work with what you've got. So the error in Sam's thinking, what Peterson and Douglas, I think, are saying here is that maybe you can do this, Sam. Maybe you can somehow manage to live an ethical and meaningful life purely rationally somehow. And then what about everybody else that's not you? What about and the reason Peterson is in a testy place saying this is because it can sound condescending. Well, what about the stupid people? Or what about the people that, aren't brilliant like us up here on stage? And I think that's not the way to interpret it. I think it's more just an objective statement about the way humans are. We're different, and we don't all come equipped with the same abilities. So I'm curious to know what you all think about that. And I'm going to read some of your comments here. Okay, I'm just looking at some of the things. Shane Lackey says dogma equals useful fiction. Griswold Grimm says intelligence feels like processing speed, where education can give you tools of thought that function as shortcuts. Yeah, and also people say intelligence is the ability to extrapolate a set of principles and rules and apply it to various situations. So if A equals B in this situation, how can I apply that, abstract it, and apply it to various situations? And the ability to do that quickly and to do that across various dimensions is one of the factors of intelligence. Scott Fisher says, welcome everybody, by the way. Thank you for being here. You are correct. In this and everything, primarily at the level of the individual, it is also without argument a larger component in forming our individual morality. Yeah, and if you watch Peterson's teachings, I don't see him ever advocating for a overly dogmatic religious worldview. I think he supports people who believe in the institution of Christianity or Catholicism or whatever religious background they have. I think he supports people to confide in the church and confide in the religious structure because that is a actual support system that is helping them live meaningful lives. And Peterson is fundamentally not concerned with just facts, but he's concerned with what makes life meaningful. That's the supreme value to him, is how can we live within a meaningful life. And he often says it's not about being happy, it's about living meaningfully. And Carl Jung had this great approach to his clinical practice where if somebody came to him and he didn't have to shake up their worldview and take them through this incredibly arduous individuation process that he was going through and that some of his other clients was going through, if they could find that same level of meaning that they needed by just going back to church, he would recommend it. Not because that would work for him, not because he believed that was right for his other clients or for himself, but because he believed in functionality. What would help this person get back to the essence of their functionality and living the most meaningful life they can? So often he would tell people, well, I advise you to go back to church. And that would solve their neurosis. That would solve the psychological issues they were dealing with, because that was the chasm that needed to be bridged. So that's kind of a practicality that I think Peterson understands as a clinician. And remember, Sam isn't a clinical psychologist. He's a philosopher and a neuroscientist. So he is both very good at reductionism and abstract philosophy, but his life experience hasn't been, as far as I can tell, involved in one-on-one counseling. So I think Peterson brings something to the table that's a little nuanced as far as how we find meaning in our lives, that perhaps Sam might have a blind spot in this area. Now, again, I do enjoy listening to Sam. I actually find him to be a very good thinker to challenge my ideas, somebody that I listen to that can help me to reflect on where my thinking needs improvement, and some of the things he says I really agree with. So by no means is this in any way a bashing of Harris or a propping up of Peterson, but just trying to look at it from how I see it, my perspective. And again, just continue please sharing what you're seeing and how it resonates with you. Shane, welcome. Hey, everybody, thank you so much for being here. I'm so glad that you're all here. So Nidax Room 7 says, just want to say I like that you're doing this. Makes me rethink this, which is a good thing. That's awesome. I'm so glad that you're here. Tell me what you're rethinking. What are you seeing now that you didn't see before? Welcome, Ben Grant, Dust to Dust. Ron Fon 669. Gloff. Dick Justice. Shout out to everyone who's here. I hope I didn't miss anyone. Griswold Grimm, obviously. The wonderful moderator and assistant to this channel. Grizz says, the intelligence part points out the same operates from my experience can be generalized for everyone because it works rationally. Yeah, right. Yeah, so maybe that's one of Harris's blind spots. That you can, the way that he's able to see it can be applied, vastly to millions of people. Where do I stand on the religious thing? I personally, my approach to the mythopoetic is I have my own, what you could call spiritual practice, and I don't mean that in a new age, airy-fairy sense. I just mean, I have symbols, meditations, prayers, and ways of reflecting, journaling, all these different practices I do that help me engage this imaginative reality that is non-linear. We might be able to bring Ian McGilchrist's right brain, left brain into this. In his book, The Master and His Emissary, he makes an argument, as far as I've been able to tell, that the right brain is a powerful, creative, non-linear approach that doesn't think in terms of the linear rationality that Harris is proposing that we all adopt. And that I think Jung would agree that the psyche is symbolic, and that if he understood the brain like we do today, would incorporate that right brain functioning into that understanding, that we need these deeper intuitive ways of being to keep our souls sane, to live lives that are harmonious and balanced within ourselves. And Harris does that through meditation. He does a Buddhist meditation, which I think is just perfect for him, for his mindset, because it doesn't require you to adopt the meditation practice itself. He's not a Buddhist religious person, but the meditation practice itself doesn't require you to adopt any specific belief system. All you have to do is practice being in the present moment, following your breath, whether it be closing your eyes or leaving them open. And that's his way into the non-linear, non-rational place that feeds the soul. I don't know if you would admit to that, but I think that it's important that even Sam has his own way into that. So anyways, thank you all for tuning in. I'm so glad I was able to do this video. I was a little afraid to do it because I haven't been feeling at my best, so I was worried that my articulation would be less than standard, less than I expect from myself. But I do hope that at least you were able to make sense of some of the things I said, and I hope it sparks some ideas for you about how you're growing into your own life philosophy and how you see the world. And, again, let's respect these great thinkers, and shout out to Jordan Peterson for everything he's going through. And I just really, my heart goes out to him, and I really am so grateful to all the things that he's taught me and the way that he's pushed me to challenge my own thinking. It's so cool too, because he did such a good job inspiring me to the point where now I can look at his ideas and have a critical eye, not just be a sycophant and be like, okay, Dr. Peterson, whatever you say, but to really actually be in a place of trusting my own ability to think and evaluate each idea on its own merits. And I think that's a real accomplishment and a sign of a great teacher. It's somebody who brings you past the point of needing them and to the point of being your own solid individual force that can even look back at their ideas with your own opinions, your own thoughts. And also shout out to Dr. Strachan, my other very important mentor that I meet with often and we speak often. He's taught me so much about psychology, and I really recommend those of you who are just getting to know this channel, go check out the playlist with Dr. Strachan. He's a fantastic psychologist. He really understands the subpersonalities and the way that we are not just one thing. We're made up of various forces within that constitute the psyche with their own perspective, agency, emotion that we shift in and out of throughout the day. And that's been validated through a large quantity of research as well as phenomenological observation. All right, so I'm going to read a few more comments here and then I'm going to get going. Nedax Room 7 says, I think we are made to have belief, whether it's in God or nothing. Dogmatism is an evolutionary mechanic, and I don't know if we can run from it. Yeah, I think that's an interesting. It just depends on what you mean by dogmatism. It's such a dirty word now. We certainly need belief structures, and I equate dogmatism with fundamentalism, like rigidity to a belief. However, if you mean by dogmatism the need to have a life myth that imbues you with meaning and a sense of purpose, then absolutely. Adela Darling, thank you for thanking me. Thank you for thanking me. You're welcome, I should say. I'm glad that you liked this broadcast. And Dust to Dust. I know. I hope Mercury's okay too. We're talking and he's doing okay. I haven't talked to him yet today. He's just in a rough place right now and could use all your prayers and support. So, for those of you who don't know Mercury, he is my partner on this channel. He's taking an indefinite hiatus right now. He's having a really hard time with just states of mind, and he struggles with bipolar diagnosis, and he's got some real strenuous issues in his life that are triggering those states of mind. So he could use any prayers if you're into that sort of thing, and just hopeful comments and love. So everything you say. Nita X from 7. I mean, yeah, belief structure and Grimm. I get you and often feel the same. Because Grimm says, I get stuck on whether believing what's real results in better functioning than believing everything will be okay or worse functioning. That's an interesting topic. We should dive into that sometime. Okay, everyone, thank you so much. I'm glad that you're here. If I didn't get to your comments, please tune in next time. I'm very spontaneous with these streams. I hope to get on a more rigid schedule at some point, but right now I just do it as I can with everything else going on in my life. Sending my love to all. If you want to support the channel, we have links in the description. But just a like, comment, a subscribe. Those things really help us out so that we can continue to get as many people involved as possible. The real goal here is, my career is really involved with working with clients, leading group workshops, and helping other people live a soul-directed life, meaning a meaningful life full of purpose and intention. And so the real goal is to reach as many people, and even just changing one person's day is a phenomenal success. So if you benefit from this sort of stuff, we do all sorts of different kind of content, and we would really appreciate your continued support and your continued listening. All right, again, love to you all. I will be in touch, and I can't wait to do another stream. I had a lot of fun today.